All right, we've played with simplifying rational expressions long enough. Now let's get into actually solving some rational equations. That's where the fun stuff is. And it turns out that solving rational equations, there's a couple of tools that we can use that really make rational equations and solving them not that difficult. So we'll be in this section solving rational equations. A key thing to distinguish or to tell the difference between is when you're working with expressions or when you're working with equations. When you're working with expressions, as we've done in the past, we've got to just sort of monkey around and try different tools to help us simplify that expression. When we are working with equations, what we want in the end is we want to know what y is equal to. We want a number, or sometimes I guess it works out to an expression, but typically it's a number that I want to know for what y is equal to. And there's different, I guess there's similarities, but there's also different tools that you can use for each one of those. Expressions, though, you simplify. Equations, you solve. I guess in equations you do some simplifying too, but in the end, we want you to solve them. Okay, so somebody came up with a name for this, and I'm not sure what it's called in the book, but I guess it goes back maybe to that factor of one kind of an idea. Anyway, it's called the I hate fractions rule. I like the name of that. Anyway, if I look at this equation and I see a y on the bottom there and I have to solve this, I'm immediately going, oh, great. But if I know the I hate fractions rule, it makes solving this quite simple. And the trick for using the I hate fractions rule is finding the lowest common denominator. So if I see an 8 and a 5 and a y, I know my lowest common denominator is going to be 8 times 5 is 40, so 40y. Do whatever you need to do to get to that lowest common denominator. Then, and this is sort of the messy part, is you multiply every term in that equation, doesn't matter what side of the equal side they're on, multiply every term in that equation by the lowest common denominator. Now, this is a rule that only works with equations. Thou shalt not use this with expressions. Won't work. We have similar things there, but I can't multiply every term by a lowest common denominator and solve an expression. But with equations, I can. Okay, so 40y has to be multiplied by 5 over 8. And I have to take 40y and multiply it by 2 over 5. And I have to take 40y and multiply it by 1 over y. Sort of looks ugly. There's some fractions involved and it looks longer than it started with. But bear with me, you'll see that it turns out nicely. Now simplify each term. 8 into 40 goes 5. 5 times 5 is 25. So this first expression, or first term, turns out to be just 25y. No fractions. Next one, 5 into 40 goes 8. 8 times 2 is 16. So this would be minus 16y. Y divides into y. That's a common factor of 1. 40 times 1 is 40. Now immediately I've got a nice looking equation, no fractions at all. 16 minus, or 25 minus 16 is 9y is equal to 40. Divide both sides by 9. And my solution for y is 40 over 9. So the key with this one is to find the lowest common denominator and then multiply each term by that lowest common denominator. Sometimes people are doing this step here in their heads. If you can do that step in your head and not have to write it down and get it right every time, I'm happy with that. If you mess up a little bit, hey, put an extra step in. Doesn't hurt anything. Let's try another one. Okay, here's one where I have a y in the bottom. I see it's a rational equation. I curse a little bit, and then I remember the I hate fraction rule. So the only denominators I have really are 1 and y, so I'm going to take every term and multiply it by y. So y times y will be y squared. Y times this, the y's will cancel, leaving me with just 22. And minus 13 times y would be a minus 13y. I look at what I have left there. There's a quadratic involved, so I bring everything to the right side. Plus 22 is equal to 0, and I look to see if I can solve that. See if I can factor it. If I can't factor it, I can use the quadratic formula to help me solve. I think this one works though. 22 is 11 times 2, so it'd be y plus 11, y plus 2 equals 0. Is that right? Y squared 2, yeah, that's 13, 22, yeah, that works. Now I use the 0 property. Remember the 0 property? Y plus 11 is equal to 0, or y plus 2 is equal to 0. So y is equal to a minus 11, or y is equal to a minus 2. One thing that you have to always do when you're working with a rational equation is if I have a variable that's in the bottom, I have to be careful that it's not 0. So always check if if I have my answers here, I plug my answers in, minus 11 or minus 2. Neither of those give me a 0 on the bottom, therefore both of them will check out. And you can simply or plug them in and solve the equation to make sure that both sides are the same. But these ones will check out. Let's try another one. Ooh, a little bit harder here. So I need to find the lowest common denominator, and that will be a y. So y, and it'll be a y minus 2. Notice that although this has a y in it, it's combined with another term. It's a binomial, so I can't say that I already have a y just from this one. So the lowest common denominator is both y times y minus 2. Okay, so now I take each term and multiply it by that. So I'm going to do it the long way this time. Y times y minus 2 times 50 over y. Okay, minus, okay, y times y minus 2, lowest common denominator, times 50 over y minus 2 is equal to, lowest common denominator again, y minus 2 multiplied by 4 over y. Okay, it sort of looks ugly, but now let's look for factors of 1. Y over y, there's a factor of 1. Y minus 2, y minus 2, another factor of 1. And here's a y, and there's a y. So now let's multiply what we have left. Y minus 2 times 50 will be 50y minus 100. And then this would be y times 50 will just be minus 50y. Is that right? Yeah. Equals 4 times y minus 2, so it'll be 4y minus 8. Look at that, no fractions. You have to like that. Now 50y minus 50y, hey, they go away. So that's minus 100 is equal to 4y minus 8. Let's push the 8 to the other side and add it. So it'll be a minus 92 is equal to 4y. That's a 4. Divide both sides by a 4. 4 into there will go about 23-ish. Negative 23. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. So y comes out to being 23. I check, I put a 23 there, that's okay. 23 minus 23, that's minus 25, that's okay. Minus 23 in there, that's okay too. So that one checks out. Notice again, all I did was I found the lowest common denominator, then I multiply each and every term by that lowest common denominator. Look for factors of 1, simplify the rest. Let's try one last one. Oh, that one is looking a little bit nicer, a little bit longer. Okay, first need to factor that. So let's leave this as 7x over x minus 2 minus 8 over x plus 5 equals 1 over. There's a common factor 2 that I can take out, and I'll be left with x squared plus 3x minus 10. Oh, great. I've got to factor that again. So I have 7 over x minus 2 minus 8 over x plus 5 equals 1 over 2 times, I can factor that. That'll be x plus 5, x minus 2. Again, you can check that. Okay, I factored everything. Everything's down into a factored form. Now, go for the lowest common denominator. So my lowest common denominator will be, it has to have an x minus 2 in it, have to have an x plus 5 in it, has to have a 2 in it. Well, I have an x plus 5. I have x minus 2. Yeah, there it is right there. So here's my lowest common denominator. Now take every term in the equation and multiply it by this lowest common denominator. I'm going to skip a step here because I know if I multiply this by this, the x minus 2's will cancel. So all I'll have really is 2 times x plus 5 times 7 for that first term. And if I take this one and multiply it by this whole thing, the x plus 5's will cancel. So all I'll have left is 2 times x minus 2 times that 8. Notice I just kept that minus there. Equals, on the other side, oh, I have that whole thing down on the bottom. So it'll all cancel. I'll just have a 1 there. Careful with that. If skipping that term messes you up, put that whole line in there. So you take this term and multiply it by this. Take this term, multiply it by that. Take that term, multiply it by that. I just tried to do it in my head. Okay, now let's multiply. So 2 times 7 is 14. 14 times x would be 14x. 14 times 5 would be 70. Minus 2 times 8 is minus 16. Minus 16 times x is minus 16x. Minus 16 times minus 2 would be plus 32, hopefully, is equal to 1. Okay, collect like terms. 14x, that'd be a minus 2x. 70 plus 32, that'd be 102, is equal to 1. And then move this to the other side, so I have minus 2x is equal to negative 101. Divide both sides by 2, and I'll get 101 over 2. That seems just a hair out. Let me just check my work here. I've got this x minus 2, so it's 2 times x plus 5 times 7. That's right. 14x plus 70. Yeah, that's right. Is that right? 14 times 5? Yeah, that's right. And then this one times this one, just this is left with the 8 minus 16x plus 32. Yeah, that's right. And then over here they all cancel. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It's a good idea to go back and check like that when you do the questions. So our key thing here is using the thing known as the I hate fractions rule, which says find a lowest common denominator and then multiply every term in your equation by that lowest common denominator. And when you do that, you'll wind up with just a normal kind of an equation. Sometimes it can be a linear one like this one that you solve like you always do. Sometimes you'll wind up with a quadratic that you'll have to factor and then use the zero property. But all of them will lead you to an equation that will be easier to solve than one that includes fractions. Try some questions. Give us a holler if you have troubles.